I became a transit records coordinator for the Metropolitan Underground Transit Authority 3 years ago, though the position itself has existed for considerably longer. My grandfather held this job for 32 years before his retirement, and his father before him for 27. When I accepted the position, I understood it would be different from typical municipal employment. What I didn't understand was how necessary those differences were. The job posting never appeared on any public board. My grandfather called me 6 months before his official retirement date and asked me to meet him at a diner I'd never been to, in a neighborhood I rarely visited. He was already seated when I arrived, looking older than I'd seen him look before, though he'd always been a sturdy man. He ordered coffee for both of us and waited until the server was out of earshot before speaking. "The position opens in February," he said. "You'll need to apply in person. There's no online portal." I hadn't known I was being offered anything. At the time, I was working data entry for an insurance company, the kind of job that paid enough to cover rent and student loans but left no room for anything resembling a future. My grandfather had never shown much interest in my career before. We were close in the way families often are, present at holidays, cordial during phone calls, but not involved in the daily details of each other's lives. "What position?" I asked. He handed me a business card with an address printed in plain black text. No name, no title, no phone number. Just an address in the administrative district downtown, near the old transit headquarters that had been partially converted into a museum decades ago. "Transit records coordinator," he said. "It's steady work. Better pay than what you're doing now. Full benefits, pension, the whole package. It's a municipal job, but it's not advertised publicly. The position stays in families when possible. Makes the training simpler." "Training for what?" I asked. "I don't know anything about transit systems." "You'll learn what you need to know," he said. "The technical aspects are straightforward. It's the protocols that matter. Those take time." He looked at me for a long moment, and I realized he was deciding something. Whatever he saw in my face must have satisfied him, because he continued. "The job requires adherence to very specific procedures," he said. "They'll seem unusual at first. Some of them will seem arbitrary. They're not. Every protocol exists for a reason, and those reasons were learned through experience, often difficult experience. If you take this position, you'll need to follow every rule exactly as it's given to you. No shortcuts, no assumptions, no personal interpretations. Can you do that?" I thought about my apartment, about the calls from loan servicers, about the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from work that means nothing. I thought about the fact that my grandfather, who rarely asked anything of anyone, was sitting across from me offering something that sounded like security. "Yes," I said. He nodded once. "Good. Go to that address next Tuesday at 9 in the morning. Ask for Martin Kress. Tell him I sent you. He'll conduct the interview." The interview was unlike any I'd attended before. The building at the address was older than most of the structures around it, a narrow 5-story brick construction wedged between modern office towers. The directory in the lobby listed various municipal departments, most of which I'd never heard of. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and found myself in a hallway that smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax. The door marked Records and Archival Services opened into a small reception area with no receptionist. Another door beyond it stood partially open. I knocked and heard a voice tell me to enter. Martin Kress was somewhere in his 60s, with gray hair and the kind of precise, careful movements that suggested someone accustomed to working with delicate materials. His office was lined with filing cabinets and shelves holding identical black binders, each labeled with dates going back further than I could easily read from where I stood. "You're David's grandson," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Sit down." I sat. He spent a moment looking at a file on his desk. Presumably mine, though I couldn't imagine what it contained. "Your grandfather speaks highly of your reliability," he said. "That's the most important quality for this position. Not intelligence, though that helps. Not education, though you have enough. Reliability. The ability to do the same thing the same way every time, regardless of circumstances. Do you consider yourself reliable?" "I do," I said. "Why do you want this job?" It was a fair question. I decided on honesty. Because it sounds stable. Because my current work doesn't lead anywhere. Because my grandfather thought I should apply, and I trust his judgment. Cress nodded. Those are acceptable reasons. Let me tell you what the job entails, and then you can decide if you're still interested. He explained that the transit records coordinator was responsible for monitoring and documenting specific operational irregularities in the underground transit system. The system was old, he said, with sections dating back more than a century. Like any infrastructure of that age and complexity, it had quirks. Some of those quirks were mechanical, some were structural, some were neither, and those were the ones that required careful documentation. You'll work night shifts, he said, 10 at night until 6 in the morning, 5 nights a week. Your office is in sublevel 3 of Station Central. You'll have access to monitoring equipment, communication lines, and the archives. Your job is to observe, record, and follow the protocols. Nothing more, nothing less. What kind of irregularities? I asked. You'll be trained to recognize them, he said. They're specific and well documented. You'll have manuals, and David will train you personally for the first month. After that, you'll work independently. And if I observe something that's not in the manuals, then you follow the general protocols until you can consult with me or your grandfather. But that's rare. Almost everything has been documented by now. He named a salary that was 40% higher than what I was currently making. The benefits included healthcare, dental, vision, and a pension that would fully vest after 10 years. There was also a housing stipend that would nearly cover my rent. There's one other thing, Cress said. This position requires a minimum commitment of 10 years. You can't simply quit. If you accept the job, you're agreeing to see it through. There are circumstances that allow for early departure, medical incapacity, certain family emergencies, but they're reviewed on a case-by-case basis. This isn't the kind of work you can walk away from on a whim. Why 10 years? I asked. Because the training is expensive, the knowledge is specialized, and the work is too important to be treated casually, he said. We need people who will stay. Do you understand? I did, though I didn't fully grasp what I was agreeing to. I thought about 10 years of stability, of being able to save money, of not living paycheck to paycheck. I thought about my grandfather, who had done this work for 3 decades and retired with a house and savings and the kind of quiet dignity that comes from a job done well. I understand, I said. Then we'll proceed with the paperwork. The paperwork was extensive. I signed forms acknowledging various policies, confidentiality agreements, safety protocols, and liability waivers. One document, longer than the others, outlined the terms of my employment in dense legal language. I read it carefully, or as carefully as anyone reads such things, and saw nothing that seemed unusual for a municipal position. I signed everything. You start in 3 weeks, Cress said. David will meet you at Station Central on your first night. Follow his instructions exactly. My grandfather picked me up at my apartment on my first night of work. It was January, and the cold had the sharp, penetrating quality that makes even short walks feel punishing. He drove in silence until we were downtown, navigating streets I'd traveled countless times on the subway but rarely saw from above. Station Central was the largest hub in the system, a sprawling underground complex that connected 6 different lines and served tens of thousands of commuters daily. During rush hours, it was chaos, bodies pressing through turnstiles, trains arriving and departing with mechanical precision, the constant echo of announcements and footsteps and conversations blending into white noise. At night, it was different. My grandfather led me through a service entrance I'd never noticed, down a stairwell that descended past the public platforms into areas marked for authorized personnel only. The air grew cooler as we descended. The sounds of the station faded, replaced by the deeper mechanical hums of ventilation systems and distant train movements. Sublevel 3 was a corridor of offices and equipment rooms, all painted the same institutional beige. My grandfather stopped at a door labeled Records Coordination and unlocked it with a key he then handed to me. This is your office, he said. You'll spend most of your time here. The room was roughly 15 feet square, with no windows, unsurprising, given we were 3 levels below ground. One wall held a bank of monitors showing various camera feeds from throughout the station. Another wall was lined with filing cabinets. A desk sat in the center with a computer, a phone, and several thick binders. A small table against the third wall held a coffee maker, a microwave, and a mini fridge. The monitors cycle through different camera positions automatically, my grandfather said. You can override the cycle if you need to focus on a particular location. This panel controls which feeds you see. He showed me how to navigate the system. There were more than 100 cameras throughout Station Central, covering platforms, corridors, stairwells, and service areas. The feeds were organized by level and location, with timestamps in the corner of each image. Your job is to watch, he said. Most nights, nothing unusual happens. You'll see maintenance crews, transit police on patrol, the occasional late passenger. You'll see trains arriving and departing. You'll see all the normal operations of a transit system at night. But sometimes you'll see other things. When you do, you need to document them according to the protocols. He pulled one of the binders from the shelf and placed it on the desk. The cover read, Operational Protocols. Night Coordination. This is your manual, he said. It contains every procedure you need to know. Read it tonight. Study it. I'll be here with you for the next month, and we'll go through scenarios, but you need to know this material thoroughly. I opened the binder. The first section was an index listing dozens of different scenarios, each with a corresponding protocol number. The scenarios had names like unauthorized platform presence, temporal displacement, echo events, and threshold manifestations. What are these? I asked. They're the irregularities I mentioned, my grandfather said. Each one has been documented and categorized. When you observe one, you identify it, record it in the log, and follow the appropriate protocol. The protocols tell you exactly what to do, who to call, what forms to fill out, what announcements to make if necessary. Temporal displacement? I said, reading one of the entries again. Page 47, he said. Read it. I turned to page 47. The entry was detailed and precise, written in the same bureaucratic language as any other operational manual. It described a phenomenon where individuals or objects appeared to be present in locations inconsistent with their expected temporal position. It provided examples. A maintenance worker seen on a platform where no maintenance was scheduled, wearing a uniform design that hadn't been used in 15 years. A train arriving at a platform despite no train being scheduled or dispatched. Sounds of construction in areas where no construction was occurring. The protocol was equally precise. Observe and document the event. Note the exact time, location, and nature of the displacement. Do not approach or interact with the displaced individual or object. Do not alert other personnel unless they are also observing the event. File a Type 7 report within 1 hour of observation. Monitor the location for the next 4 hours for any subsequent irregularities. This is real, I asked. My grandfather looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Everything in that manual is real. Everything has been observed and documented multiple times. The protocols exist because they work. They keep people safe and they keep the system running. But how is this possible? That's not a question you need to answer, he said. You're not here to understand why these things happen. You're here to observe them, document them, and follow the procedures. The understanding, if there is any, belongs to other people in other departments. Your job is simpler and more important. You maintain the records and follow the rules. He let that sit for a moment before continuing. The hardest part of this job isn't the irregularities themselves, he said. It's accepting that they happen and moving past the need to explain them. You'll see things that don't make sense. Things that contradict what you think you know about how the world works. Your instinct will be to rationalize them, to find explanations, to convince yourself you're seeing something mundane. Don't do that. Trust your observations. Document what you see. Follow the protocols. That's all. We spent the rest of that first night going through the manual. He explained each category of irregularity, walked me through the corresponding protocols, and showed me how to fill out the various report forms. He explained the phone system, which numbers reached transit police, which reached maintenance, which reached other coordinators in other stations, and which reached Kress himself. "You'll have his direct line," my grandfather said. "Use it only for Category 5 events or higher. Those are rare, but they require immediate escalation. For anything Category 4 or below, you document and file. Kress reviews all reports weekly." "How often do these irregularities happen?" I asked. "Depends on the category," he said. "Category 1 and Category 2 events might happen a few times a week. They're minor, strange sounds, brief visual anomalies, that sort of thing. Category 3 events are less frequent, maybe once or twice a month. Category 4 is a few times a year. Category 5 is rare. I've seen 3 in 32 years. And Category 6? He was quiet for a moment. "There is no Category 6. Not anymore. There was once, but the protocols for preventing it have been effective." He didn't elaborate, and something in his tone told me not to press. The first week was uneventful. I sat in my office, watched the monitors, drank coffee, and saw nothing but the normal operations of a transit system at night. Maintenance crews worked on tracks during the service gaps. Transit police walked their routes. The occasional drunk or homeless person wandered through areas they shouldn't be in and was politely redirected by security. I read the manual cover to cover, then read it again. I memorized the protocols. I studied the example reports in the appendix. I learned the geography of Station Central until I could visualize the entire complex in my mind. Every platform, every corridor, every stairwell and service tunnel. My grandfather sat with me each night, answering questions, pointing out details on the monitors, teaching me to recognize patterns. He showed me which cameras had slight delays, which ones had blind spots, which ones were most likely to capture useful footage. "You'll develop instincts," he said. "You'll learn to feel when something's off before you see it. The atmosphere changes. It's subtle, but you'll notice." On the 8th night, I saw my first irregularity. It was 2:30 in the morning. I was watching the feed from Platform 7, one of the deeper platforms servicing the oldest line in the system. The platform was empty, as it should have been. No trains were scheduled until the morning service began at 5. Then I saw movement. A figure walked into frame from the left side of the screen. At first, I thought it was maintenance or security, but something was wrong. The figure's movements were odd, too smooth, too steady, as if they were gliding rather than walking. They wore what looked like a conductor's uniform, but the style was old-fashioned, with brass buttons and a peaked cap I'd only seen in historical photos of the transit system. The figure walked to the center of the platform and stopped. They stood perfectly still, facing the tracks. I glanced at my grandfather. He was already watching the same monitor, his expression calm. "Category 2, he said. "Echo event. What's the protocol?" I pulled up the manual, though I'd already memorized it. "Document the observation. Note time, location, description. Do not interact. Monitor for 15 minutes. If the manifestation persists beyond 15 minutes, escalate to Category 3. Correct. Start documenting." I opened the log on the computer and began typing. The time: 2 hours 31 minutes and 47 seconds. Location: Platform 7, lower level. Description: single humanoid figure, approximate height 6 feet, wearing historical conductor uniform, standing motionless facing tracks. The figure stood there for 11 minutes. I watched the timestamp tick forward, watching for any change. The figure never moved, never shifted weight, never turned their head. They simply stood, as still as a photograph. At 2 hours 42 minutes and 33 seconds, the figure faded. Not walked away, not left the frame. Faded. Like a video dissolving into transparency, they became less solid, less present, until they were gone. "Echo event," my grandfather said. "Most common irregularity you'll see. They're harmless. They never interact with anything in the present. They're just impressions. Moments from the past bleeding through. No one knows why certain moments echo and others don't, but they do. You document them, and that's all." "That was a real person," I said. "Someone who worked here. Once, yes. Long ago. But what you saw wasn't a person anymore. It was an echo. A recording, in a way. The system remembers things. Sometimes those memories show themselves. I filed the report and continued monitoring. The rest of the night passed without incident. Over the following weeks, I saw more irregularities. Twice more, I observed echo events, different figures in different locations, but always the same quality of movement, the same eventual fade. I documented them according to protocol. I heard sounds with no source, footsteps in empty corridors, announcements in languages I didn't recognize, music that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. Category 1 events. I noted them in the log. I saw temporal inconsistencies. A modern LED display showing departure times in obsolete format. A wall that appeared to be painted in a color scheme that hadn't been used in 40 years. A sign pointing to a platform that no longer existed. These lasted only moments before snapping back to normal. Category 2. I documented each one. My grandfather watched me work, correcting small errors, ensuring I understood not just the what but the why of each protocol. He explained the importance of precise language in the reports, of clear timestamps, of distinguishing between what I observed and what I thought I observed. Subjectivity is the enemy, he said. Report only what you see, exactly as you see it. No interpretation, no assumptions. The reports go into the archives, and they're studied by people who look for patterns across years and decades. Your accuracy matters. By the end of the first month, my grandfather stopped coming with me. I worked alone, following the protocols, documenting the irregularities, maintaining the records. The job became routine in the way any job does. Familiar procedures, predictable patterns, the occasional unusual event handled according to established protocol. But there was something else, something my grandfather had warned me about, but that I hadn't fully understood until I experienced it. The job was lonely, not just in the obvious sense of working nights alone in an underground office. That kind of loneliness was simple, almost comfortable. This was different. This was the loneliness of being party to knowledge that couldn't be shared, of seeing things that most people would never believe, of following rules that made sense only in the context of a reality most of the world never touched. I couldn't talk to friends about my work. What would I say? That I watched for ghosts in the subway? That I documented temporal anomalies according to a manual written by people I'd never met? That my job was to observe the impossible and treat it as routine? I went to family gatherings and told people I worked in transit administration. I went on dates and described my job as monitoring and documentation. Both statements were true but meaninglessly incomplete. The isolation deepened as the months passed. I found myself more comfortable in my underground office than in the world above. The irregularities became familiar, expected. The protocols became second nature. I could identify a Category 1 event from a Category 2 at a glance. I knew which platforms were most likely to show echo events, which corridors carried the strange music, which stairwells sometimes displayed signs for stations that had been demolished decades ago. I learned to feel the wrongness my grandfather had mentioned, the subtle shift in atmosphere that preceded an irregularity. The air would change, growing heavier or colder or somehow thicker. The ambient sounds would fade slightly, as if someone had turned down a volume dial I couldn't see. And then the irregularity would occur, and I would document it, and the world would return to normal. I understood gradually that the job wasn't really about the irregularities themselves. It was about maintaining a record of them, preserving institutional knowledge, ensuring that future coordinators would know what to expect and how to respond. The transit system had been operating for more than a century, and these irregularities had presumably been happening the entire time. Someone needed to watch. Someone needed to remember. That was the job. 6 months in, I experienced my first Category 3 event. It was a Thursday night in July. The station was quieter than usual. Some kind of service disruption on one of the lines meant fewer trains and fewer overnight maintenance crews. I was monitoring the usual feeds, drinking my third coffee of the shift, when I noticed movement on the Platform 12 camera. Platform 12 was one of the abandoned platforms, sealed off from public access since the line it served had been rerouted in the 1980s. The only people who should ever be there were maintenance crews doing structural inspections, and those were always scheduled in advance. I would have been notified. I zoomed the camera in and felt the temperature in my office drop. There were people on the platform. Not one or two echo events, but dozens of figures, all crowded together as if waiting for a train. They wore clothing from different eras. I could see styles spanning at least 50 years, maybe more. Some stood alone. Others clustered in groups. None of them moved with the gliding quality of echo events. They shifted, turned their heads, gestured. And then I heard it. Through the audio feed, which I usually kept muted, came the sound of a crowd. Murmured conversations, footsteps, the rustle of clothing and bags, the ambient noise of a busy platform, coming from a platform that had been empty for 40 years. I checked the manual. Category 3, Mass Temporal Displacement. Protocol was explicit. I called Kress. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. "This is Kress. Sir, this is Records Coordination Station Central. I'm observing a Category 3 event on Platform 12. Mass Temporal Displacement. Multiple figures. Auditory component confirmed." "How many figures?" "At least 30, possibly more. They're moving like living people, not echo events." "Do not leave your office," he said. "Do not approach the platform. Continue monitoring and maintain a continuous log. I'm sending a containment team. They'll arrive within 20 minutes. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Stay on the line with me." I watched the monitors, describing what I saw while Kress listened. The figures continued their strange waiting. Some checked watches. Others paced. A few sat on benches that no longer existed in reality but apparently still existed whenever these people were. "Are they aware of their displacement?" I asked. "We don't know," Kress said. "They never show any awareness of being observed. They seem to exist in their own time, their own version of the station. We don't fully understand the mechanism." "How often does this happen?" Category 3 events occur irregularly. Sometimes months apart, sometimes clusters within weeks. We believe they're connected to structural stress in the temporal fabric around the station, though that's theoretical. What matters is documentation and containment. Containment. The team will establish a perimeter and monitor until the event resolves. Mass displacements usually last between 1 and 4 hours. They fade the same way echo events do, just more gradually. I continued watching. The figures remained on the platform, trapped in their moment, waiting for a train that would never come, or had already come decades ago. The containment team arrived exactly 18 minutes after my call. I saw them on the monitors, 4 people in dark uniforms with equipment cases, moving with practiced efficiency. They positioned themselves at the access points to Platform 12, setting up devices I couldn't identify from the camera angles. One of them called my office. "Coordinator, this is Containment Team Alpha. We're in position. Continue monitoring. Alert us to any changes in the manifestation." I watched for 3 hours and 17 minutes. The figures gradually became less distinct, their forms losing definition, their sounds fading. By 6:15 in the morning, they were gone, and Platform 12 was empty again. I filed the report as required, noting every detail I'd observed. Kress reviewed it the following week and called me into his office downtown. "Well done," he said. "Your documentation was thorough. Category 3 events require precision. You handled it correctly." "Thank you, sir." "How are you adjusting to the work?" It was the first time he'd asked me anything personal since my initial interview. I considered how to answer. "I'm managing," I said. "The protocols make sense. The irregularities are strange, but I'm learning to accept them." "And the isolation?" So he knew. Of course he knew. Everyone who did this work knew. "That's harder," I admitted. He nodded. "It is, but it's necessary. This knowledge can't be widely shared. Most people couldn't handle it, and those who could would ask questions we can't answer. The work requires a certain kind of person. Someone who can observe without needing to understand, who can follow procedures without needing justification. Your grandfather recognized that quality in you." "He never told me what it cost him," I said. "What it costs is different for everyone," Kress said. "For your grandfather, it was time. He gave 32 years to this work. He missed things, family events, opportunities, experiences. But he also provided stability for his family and maintained critical records for the institution. The cost was worth it to him. Whether it's worth it to you is something you'll need to determine for yourself. I committed to 10 years, I said. You did. But understanding what that means takes longer than a few months. You're doing well. Keep following the protocols. Keep documenting accurately. The work matters, even if you can't always see how. I returned to my shifts. The summer passed into fall into winter. I documented irregularities, filed reports, and maintained the records. I learned which nights were most likely to be active. Certain lunar phases seemed to correlate with increased Category 1 and Category 2 events, though no one could explain why. I learned to recognize the subtle differences between a true irregularity and a simple equipment malfunction or trick of light. I learned to be alone with the knowledge to carry it without sharing it. And I learned that the protocols were more than just procedures. They were a kind of protection, a framework that allowed me to witness impossible things without losing my grip on what was real. As long as I followed the protocols, I had a structure to hold on to. I wasn't lost in the strangeness. I was doing a job, fulfilling a function, maintaining a system. It was in my 10th month that I found the restricted section of the manual. I'd been looking for information about a Category 4 event I'd observed. An entire corridor that had briefly displayed a completely different architecture, walls and floor and ceiling transformed into materials and designs that predated the station by decades. The event had lasted only 90 seconds, but it had been thoroughly unsettling in a way the other irregularities hadn't been. While cross-referencing protocols, I noticed that the binder's spine was thicker than its content suggested. I examined it more carefully and found a hidden sleeve in the back cover. Inside were several additional pages, marked with a red header, Restricted Protocols, Coordinator Level Only. I read them. The restricted protocols outlined procedures I hadn't been trained on. Scenarios more severe than anything in the standard manual. Events that involved not just observation but intervention. Situations where following the standard documentation procedures wasn't enough, where active measures were required to prevent escalation. And at the end of the restricted protocols was a section labeled Institutional Framework. It explained in careful bureaucratic language what the job really was. The transit system was old, older than the official histories acknowledged. The first tunnels had been dug more than a century ago, and they'd been dug through layers of earth that had their own histories, their own memories. The city above had been built and rebuilt countless times, each iteration leaving traces, echoes, impressions in the ground itself. The irregularities weren't supernatural in the traditional sense. They were structural. The transit system existed at the intersection of multiple temporal layers, and sometimes those layers bled into each other. The past wasn't gone. It was still there, underneath, pressed into the foundation like fossils in stone. And sometimes, under the right conditions, it surfaced. The job of the transit records coordinator wasn't to stop this from happening. That was impossible. The job was to monitor it, to document it, to ensure that when the past surfaced, it did so in controlled, predictable ways. The protocols weren't just procedures. They were rituals in a sense. Patterns of behavior that helped maintain the boundary between then and now. And the 10-year commitment wasn't arbitrary. It took 10 years for a coordinator to become fully attuned to the system, to develop the instincts and awareness necessary to sense irregularities before they manifested. After 10 years, a coordinator became something like an anchor, a fixed point that helped stabilize the temporal layers around the station. But there was a cost. The longer you spent in the system, the more connected you became to it. The more you saw the irregularities, the more sensitive you grew to them. After 10 years, you couldn't leave completely. Your awareness remained heightened. You'd see echoes everywhere, not just in the station. You'd hear the strange sounds, feel the temporal shifts, sense the past bleeding through in places it shouldn't. My grandfather hadn't retired because he wanted to. He'd retired because 10 years was the minimum commitment, and 32 years was close to the maximum anyone could sustain before the connection became too strong, before the boundary between observer and observed began to blur. The restricted protocols also explained what happened if a coordinator abandoned the position before the 10-year commitment. The connection, once established, couldn't be simply severed. Leaving early meant carrying the sensitivity with you but without the framework of the protocols to manage it. Former coordinators who'd left early became permanently unstable, unable to distinguish between current reality and temporal echoes, unable to function in normal life. The 10-year commitment wasn't a bureaucratic formality. It was a necessary period of integration, of learning to manage the connection until it stabilized enough that you could carry it without the constant support of the protocols and the institution. I sat in my office, reading these pages, understanding for the first time what I'd agreed to. I had been committed to it for 10 years. I was less than 1 year in. I had 9 more years of watching, documenting, becoming more attuned to something that would never fully let me go. I thought about calling my grandfather, but I knew he couldn't tell me anything I hadn't just read. He'd known. He'd always known. That's why he'd asked if I could follow the rules, why he'd trained me so carefully, why he'd watched me those first weeks with such attention. He'd been making sure I could handle it, making sure I wouldn't break. I put the restricted pages back in their sleeve and continued my shift. The monitors showed Platform 7. Empty and quiet, just concrete and fluorescent light and the distant hum of machinery. But I knew now that it wasn't really empty. The past was there, always there, pressed into every surface. And I was learning to see it. I had 9 more years to go. The seasons began to blur after I read the restricted protocols. Not in the way time passes for everyone, but in a more literal sense. I'd be sitting in my office in November and catch a glimpse on the monitors of Platform 4 decorated with advertisements from July. Not current July, but July from 8 years ago, from 15 years ago, from decades before I was born. The images would flicker, stabilize, then fade back to the present. These weren't events I documented anymore. They were too brief, too minor. The manual classified them as Category 0, background temporal static. Normal, expected, ignorable. The system remembering itself. I learned to ignore them. That was part of the training, to learning what mattered and what didn't. If I documented every temporal hiccup, every minor echo, every brief shimmer of the past, I'd spend my entire shift filing reports. The protocols taught discernment. They taught me to recognize the difference between the system's normal breathing and something that required intervention. By the end of my first year, I documented 17 Category 2 events, 4 Category 3 events, and 1 Category 4. Crest told me this was slightly above average. Some coordinators went entire years without seeing a Category 4. The fact that I'd seen one so early suggested I had strong sensitivity, which was both an asset and a concern. Sensitivity makes you good at the job, he said during one of our quarterly reviews. But it also makes the integration more intense. You'll need to be careful about maintaining boundaries. What kind of boundaries? Between work and home, between observation and participation, between the station's time and your own. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The system will try to pull you deeper. That's not intention, it's just what happens. You're spending 40 hours a week attuned to temporal irregularities. Your mind adapts. Your perception shifts. You need to make sure you're staying grounded in the present when you're not here. I tried. I maintained friendships, though they became harder to sustain. I dated occasionally, though I could never explain why I seemed distracted. Why I sometimes heard sounds no one else heard. Why I'd occasionally stop mid-conversation and stare at empty space because I'd seen something flicker at the edge of my vision. I went to my nephew's birthday party and saw, for just a moment, the same room as it had been 20 years earlier. Different wallpaper, different furniture, different people. I blinked and it was gone, but the disorientation lingered. I went to a museum and felt the temporal layers of the building pressing against me. Decades of visitors and exhibits and renovations, all stacked on top of each other like translucent sheets. I had to leave early. The world above was becoming complicated in ways it hadn't been before. The station, by contrast, was simple. The station had rules. The station made sense. I found myself taking extra shifts. Kress noticed. He called me into his office downtown for an unscheduled meeting. "You're working 55 hours a week," he said. "The position requires 40. Why are you taking additional shifts?" I'd been expecting the question. I'd prepared an answer about extra income, about covering for other coordinators, about dedication to the work. But sitting across from him, I found myself telling the truth. "It's easier there," I said. "In the station, the irregularities are expected. They're documented. They have protocols. Out here, everything feels wrong, and there's no manual for it." Cress nodded slowly. "How long have you been experiencing surface irregularities?" 3 months, maybe 4. Category? Mostly 0. Background static. Brief visual echoes, auditory impressions. Nothing major. But it's constant. Yes. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small bottle of pills. He set it on the desk between us. "Take one of these each morning," he said. "They'll help dampen your sensitivity during off hours. They won't eliminate it completely, but they'll reduce the background static to manageable levels." I picked up the bottle. The label listed a drug name I didn't recognize and no dosage information. "What are they?" "Proprietary compound developed by the institutional medical staff. Perfectly safe. Most coordinators start taking them around the 1-year mark. Some earlier, some later. There's no shame in it. The sensitivity is a natural result of the work. And if I don't take them, then the surface irregularities will intensify. You'll have trouble functioning in normal life. You'll take more shifts to escape the discomfort, which will increase your sensitivity, which will worsen the surface irregularities. It's a cycle. The medication breaks the cycle. I studied the bottle. Is this what my grandfather took? Among other things, yes. I wanted to ask what other things, but I already suspected the answer. The job changed you. The job required management. The medication was part of that management. I started taking the pills. They helped. The surface irregularities didn't disappear, but they became quieter, less intrusive. I could go to social events without seeing temporal echoes in every corner. I could ride the subway as a passenger without feeling the weight of decades pressing through the walls. But I noticed something else. When I was in the station working my shifts, my perception felt duller. The irregularities were still visible, still documentable, but the feeling that preceded them, the atmospheric shift my grandfather had described, became less pronounced. I mentioned this to Cress during my next quarterly review. "That's normal," he said. "The medication creates balance. It reduces sensitivity during off hours and slightly reduces it during work hours. The trade-off is worth it. You're still perfectly capable of observing and documenting irregularities. You've filed 14 accurate reports since starting the medication." He was right. My work hadn't suffered. I was still doing the job correctly. But something felt different, like I was watching the irregularities through a pane of glass now instead of experiencing them directly. I wondered if this was how my grandfather had felt for 32 years. Separated from the work by a pharmaceutical barrier, doing the job competently but at a remove. I wondered if that separation was what had allowed him to last as long as he had. The 2nd year passed. Then the 3rd. I became one of the senior coordinators, training new hires the way my grandfather had trained me. I learned to recognize which candidates would last and which would struggle. The ones who asked too many questions rarely made it past the 1st month. The ones who accepted the work without needing explanations, who could follow protocols without requiring justification, those were the ones who stayed. I trained 4 coordinators during my 3rd year. 3 of them lasted. The 4th had a breakdown during their 2nd month after witnessing a Category 3 event. They kept asking why, demanding explanations, insisting there had to be a rational basis for what they were seeing. When no satisfactory explanation came, they spiraled. Cress removed them from the position and offered them a medical discharge with full benefits, citing psychological unsuitability for the work. I never saw that person again. I didn't ask what happened to them. The restricted protocols had explained what happened to coordinators who left early, and I didn't need the details. Around the start of my 4th year, I began noticing a pattern in the irregularities. Certain events seemed to cluster around specific times and locations. Platform 7 showed echo events most frequently during the hours between 2 and 4 a.m. Platform 12 had its mass displacements primarily in the summer months. The corridor connecting the blue line to the red line experienced architectural shifts most often during the new moon. I mentioned these patterns to Kress. He seemed unsurprised. "You're developing predictive instincts," he said. "That's expected at your stage of integration. The system has rhythms. Once you've observed them long enough, you begin to anticipate them." Could we prevent the irregularities if we understand the rhythms? No, and we wouldn't want to. The irregularities are pressure releases. They allow the temporal layers to bleed into each other in small, controlled ways. If we somehow prevented them, the pressure would build until something much worse occurred. What would something much worse look like? Kress was quiet for a moment. There used to be a Category 6 classification. It was removed from the manual after the protocols for prevention were established and proven effective. You don't need to know the specifics. What you need to know is that the irregularities you document are part of the system maintaining equilibrium. We monitor them to ensure they stay within acceptable parameters. That's the job. But I'd read the restricted protocols. I knew there had been incidents decades ago before the coordinator position was established, before the protocols were developed. Incidents where the temporal layers collapsed into each other completely, where past and present overlapped so thoroughly that they became indistinguishable. Entire platforms lost to temporal chaos, trapped in states that were neither then nor now. Those platforms were sealed behind the walls now, erased from official maps, inaccessible. But they were still there, still existing in their collapsed state. The protocols prevented new collapses, but they couldn't undo the old ones. I wondered sometimes what it was like in those sealed spaces, whether time moved there, or whether everything was frozen in the moment of collapse. Whether the people caught in them, and there had been people, according to the restricted protocols, were still aware, or whether awareness itself had fragmented along with time. I learned not to think about it during my shifts. Thinking about the sealed platforms made it harder to focus on monitoring the current ones. My 4th year ended. My 5th began. I was approaching the halfway point of my commitment. 5 more years and I could leave, could attempt to build a life outside the station. 5 more years and the integration would stabilize enough that I could carry the sensitivity without it destroying me. 5 years felt simultaneously close and impossibly distant. During my 5th year, I met someone. Her name was Claire. She worked as a librarian at the main branch downtown. We met at a coffee shop, started talking, exchanged numbers. She was intelligent, patient, curious about the world in a way I'd almost forgotten people could be. I told her I worked in transit administration. Night shifts, documentation, routine work. She didn't press for details. We dated for 3 months before she asked if she could visit me at work sometime. "It's not really set up for visitors," I said. "Security protocols. Restricted access." "Right, of course. I just wanted to see where you spend all your time." I wanted to show her. I wanted to bring her into my office and explain what I really did, what I really saw. I wanted to share the weight of it with someone who might understand. But the restricted protocols were explicit. Outside personnel were not permitted in coordination offices except under emergency circumstances. The knowledge was compartmentalized for good reason. The sensitivity was contagious in a sense. Exposing someone to the irregularities without proper training and support could destabilize them. I couldn't share it with her. I could barely share anything real with her. We dated for another 2 months before she ended it. She was kind about it, said I was distant, emotionally unavailable, always somewhere else even when I was physically present. She was right. I was somewhere else. I was in sublevel 3, monitoring feeds, watching for echoes, following protocols. Even when I wasn't at work, I was still there. I stopped dating after that. It seemed kinder than pretending I could maintain normal relationships. My 6th year brought my first Category 5 event. It was a March night, unseasonably warm. I was monitoring the usual feeds when I felt the atmospheric shift, stronger than any I'd experienced before, even with the medication dampening my sensitivity. The air in my office grew heavy and cold. The fluorescent lights flickered. The monitors showed static for 3 seconds before the feeds returned. When they returned, Platform 3 was wrong. Not just echoing, not just displaying elements from another time. Wrong. The platform was simultaneously showing multiple temporal versions of itself, overlaid and flickering, the current empty platform, the same platform crowded with passengers from some past year, The same platform under construction with exposed walls and equipment. The same platform in a state of abandonment with crumbling concrete and rust. All of them at once, flickering between versions too rapidly to track. I could hear sounds from the platform through the audio feed. Announcements in different voices, construction noise, conversations, silence, all layered on top of each other into a cacophony that made my head pound even through the speakers. I called Kress immediately. Category 5, I said when he answered. Platform 3, multiple temporal layers manifesting simultaneously. Evacuate the level, he said. Immediately. Use Protocol 5 Alpha. I'm dispatching an intervention team. Do not approach the platform. Do you understand? Yes, sir. I pulled up Protocol 5 Alpha on my computer. It outlined evacuation procedures for the affected area and adjacent zones. I accessed the station's announcement system and broadcast the required message. Attention all personnel on Level 2 and Level 3. Emergency maintenance protocol is now in effect. Evacuate to Level 1 or surface immediately. This is not a drill. I watched the monitors. 2 maintenance workers who'd been near Platform 3 moved quickly toward the stairs. Transit police on patrol in adjacent corridors did the same. Within 4 minutes, the level was clear. The intervention team arrived 16 minutes after my call. I watched them on the monitors, 6 people in equipment I didn't recognize, carrying cases and setting up a perimeter around Platform 3. They worked with practiced efficiency, establishing some kind of field around the affected area. One of them called my office. Coordinator, this is Intervention Team Prime. We're containing the event. Continue monitoring. Alert us if the manifestation expands beyond Platform 3. I watched for 6 hours. The intervention team worked throughout, adjusting their equipment, taking readings, occasionally consulting with each other. On the monitors, Platform 3 continued its temporal flickering, layers bleeding into each other like shuffled photographs. Gradually, the flickering slowed. The layers began to separate, to stabilize. By 6 in the morning, Platform 3 showed only occasional brief flickers. Category 2 level, manageable, normal. The intervention team packed their equipment and departed. One of them stopped by my office before leaving. Well-documented coordinator, she said. She was older than me, with gray hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen worse. Your quick response prevented escalation. What causes Category 5 events? I asked. Structural stress in the temporal layers, usually triggered by external factors, seismic activity, electromagnetic fluctuations, construction work disturbing old foundations. Sometimes no identifiable trigger. The layers just press too close together and start bleeding through. If we hadn't contained it, it could have progressed to full collapse. Like the sealed platforms. She looked at me carefully. Yes, like the sealed platforms. But that won't happen. We've gotten much better at intervention. As long as coordinators remain vigilant and alert us promptly, we can prevent collapses. After she left, I filed the report. The most detailed report I'd ever written, documenting every aspect of the event from the initial atmospheric shift through the intervention and resolution. Kress called me 3 days later and told me I'd handled it perfectly. He also told me I was being given a commendation and a salary increase. The Category 5 response would go into the archives as a model for training future coordinators. I should have felt proud. I felt exhausted. The work was becoming heavier. Not physically. I sat in an office watching monitors, which required no physical effort. Psychologically, emotionally, I was carrying the weight of knowledge that no one else I knew carried. I was seeing the instability underneath everything, the way the past pressed constantly against the present, the way time itself was more fragile than people realized. And I had for more years of it. I started making mistakes. Small ones, filing reports a few hours late, occasionally missing brief Category 1 events, forgetting to notify maintenance about required equipment checks. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that Kress noticed. He called me in for another unscheduled meeting. You're struggling, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm managing. You're not. Your performance is declining. Not dramatically, but consistently. You're at the 6-year mark. This is common. The integration process is most difficult during years 6 through 8. You're past the initial adjustment, but not yet stabilized. It's a difficult period. What do I do? You continue following the protocols. You take your medication. You come to work, document the irregularities, file the reports. You maintain the routine. The routine is what carries you through. And if that's not enough? Cress regarded me seriously. Then we increase your medical support, adjust your medication, potentially add therapeutic sessions with our institutional psychologists. But most coordinators don't require that. Most make it through this period by simply persisting. Did my grandfather go through this? Everyone goes through it. Some handle it better than others. Your grandfather had the advantage of knowing what he was entering into. His father had done the work before him. He understood the cost from the beginning. You didn't have that context. But you committed to 10 years and you're more than halfway through. You can finish. I wanted to ask if finishing was really possible, if anyone truly finished, or if we all just reached the 10-year mark still fundamentally changed, still carrying the sensitivity, still seeing the echoes wherever we went. But I knew the answer. I returned to my shifts. I followed the protocols. I documented the irregularities. I took my medication. I maintained the routine. And slowly, gradually, it became easier. Not because the work changed, but because I did. I stopped resisting the weight of it. I stopped trying to maintain the person I'd been before I took this job. That person was gone. The work had changed me, and fighting that change only made it harder. I accepted what I'd become. Someone who lived between layers, who saw what others didn't, who maintained the boundary between then and now. My 7th year was quieter. My 8th year was quieter still. I documented irregularities with the efficiency of long practice. I trained new coordinators with patience and precision. I took my medication without resenting it. I filed my reports on time. I became exactly what the job required, reliable. Cress noticed this too. During my 8-year review, he commented on my improved stability. "You've integrated well," he said. "Better than most. I'd like to discuss your options for after your 10-year commitment ends." Options. Most coordinators do leave after 10 years. They've fulfilled their obligation, and they're ready to attempt life outside the institution. We support that. We provide ongoing medical care and periodic check-ins to ensure the sensitivity remains manageable. But some coordinators choose to stay, to extend their commitment, sometimes indefinitely. We need senior coordinators, people with your level of experience and stability, to manage the program, train new personnel, and handle the more complex events. Like you, I said. Yes, I was a coordinator for 12 years before moving into administration. I've been with the institution for 26 years total. It's not a choice for everyone, but for some of us, leaving isn't really possible. Not because we're not allowed to, but because there's nowhere else that makes sense. I thought about what life after 10 years would look like. Finding a normal job, explaining the gap in my resume, pretending I didn't see temporal echoes in every old building I entered, taking medication forever, carrying the sensitivity like a chronic condition, where I could stay, continue the work I'd learned to do well, remain in an environment where the strangeness was expected, where the protocols provided structure, where I wasn't alone with the knowledge. "I have 2 years left on my commitment," I said. "Can I decide later?" "Of course. The offer stands whenever you're ready." My 9th year brought another Category 5 event, this one at Platform 8. I handled it with calm efficiency, coordinating with the intervention team, evacuating the affected areas, monitoring until resolution. The event was contained within 3 hours. I also documented 23 Category 2 events, 7 Category 3 events, and dozens of Category 1 events. I trained 3 new coordinators, all of whom showed promise. I maintained perfect accuracy in my reports. I became, in the language of the institution, an exemplary coordinator. But I noticed something during my 9th year. The medication was becoming less effective. The surface irregularities were breaking through again. Echoes in my apartment, temporal static in public spaces, brief flickers of other times overlaying the present. I mentioned this to the institutional medical staff during my annual physical. They adjusted my dosage. The surface irregularities quieted again, but not as much as before. Your sensitivity has deepened, the doctor explained. That's normal at 9 years. The medication can only dampen so much. You'll need to be more careful about managing your exposure to triggering environments. What counts as a triggering environment? Old buildings, crowded spaces, places with strong historical significance, anywhere the temporal layers are naturally thin. So most of the city, most places people normally went. I started spending more time in my apartment and at work, avoiding areas that triggered breakthrough echoes. It was easier that way, simpler. I was 10 weeks from my 10-year mark when Kress called me into his office for a final pre-completion meeting. "You're approaching the end of your commitment," he said. "I need to know your intentions. Will you be leaving the institution or extending your term?" I'd been thinking about this question for 2 years. I'd imagined different answers, different futures. But sitting in his office, I realized I'd already decided. "I'm staying," I said. Kress nodded slowly. "You're certain?" "Yes. You understand that extending your commitment makes the integration permanent? There's no fixed end date. You'll be with the institution as long as you're capable of performing the work." "I understand. Why are you staying?" It was the same question he'd asked during my initial interview in different form. "Why do you want this job? Why are you choosing this life?" "Because I'm good at it," I said. "Because the work matters. Because there's nowhere else I fit anymore." "Those are honest reasons," Kress said. "They're enough." He pulled out a contract similar to the one I'd signed 10 years earlier, but without the fixed term. This one simply stated that my employment would continue indefinitely, subject to performance reviews and institutional needs. I signed it. "Welcome to permanent staff," Kress said. "We'll begin transitioning you into senior coordinator responsibilities next month. You'll continue your monitoring shifts but also take on training coordination and protocol development. Your salary will increase accordingly." I returned to my office in Sublevel 3. My office, where I'd spent 10 years watching monitors, documenting impossibilities, following protocols that maintained the boundary between past and present. I sat at my desk and began my shift. The monitors cycled through their feeds, platforms, corridors, stairwells, service areas. All quiet, all normal. Then I felt it, the atmospheric shift. I checked the monitors. Platform 7. A figure standing at the edge of the platform, wearing a coordinator's uniform. Not a historical uniform. A current uniform. My uniform. The figure stood perfectly still, facing the tracks. I understood what I was seeing. Not an echo from the past. An echo from the future. A moment that hadn't happened yet but would happen, being pressed backward through the temporal layers into the present. The figure was me. Some future version, standing on Platform 7, doing something I hadn't done yet but would do eventually. I watched for 11 minutes. The figure never moved, never turned, never showed any sign of awareness. At minute 12, it faded. I opened my log and began documenting. Category 2 event. Echo event. Platform 7. But I hesitated before completing the description. Should I note that the figure was me? Was that relevant information? Did it matter? I decided it didn't. The identity of echo figures was rarely relevant. What mattered was the observation, the documentation, the maintenance of records. I filed the report and continued monitoring. The night stretched ahead of me. Years stretched ahead of me. Decades, potentially. I would watch the monitors. I would document the irregularities. I would follow the protocols. Because someone had to watch. Someone had to remember. And I had chosen to be that someone. The monitors showed Platform 3. Empty and quiet. Just concrete and fluorescent light and the weight of decades pressed into every surface. But I knew better now. I knew what was underneath. I knew what I was keeping at bay, what I was maintaining the boundary against. I poured another cup of coffee and settled in for the rest of my shift. The protocols were clear. The work was necessary, and I was exactly where I belonged.